To today's conversation at noon, the lasting legacy of the Litchfield Law School, America's first school of law. My name is Rebecca Tabor Conover, and I'm the head of public programs here at the Connecticut Democracy Center at Connecticut's Old State House. And I'm so pleased to welcome you to today's program. Please make sure to post any questions you might have in the comments section during the program, and do fill out the survey that's listed in the program description. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Catherine Keene Fields. Kathy has been the director of the Litchfield Historical Society since 1987. Before coming to Litchfield, she was director of the Passaic County Historical Society in Paterson, New Jersey for 7 years. She holds a BA in American History from the College of William and Mary in Virginia, and an MA in Cultural History Museum Administration from the University of Vermont. And she also attended the Seminar for Historical Administration. While in Paterson, Kathy collaborated with other local organizations to develop joint exhibits and programming, including the award-winning NEH-funded Life and Times in Silk City. During her long tenure at the Litchfield Historical Society, Kathy has strengthened the Historical Society's connections to the community through exhibitions, school and family programs, and special projects. She directed the renovation and reinterpretation of both the Litchfield History Museum and the Tapping Reeve House in Litchfield Law School. She guided the Society through accreditation by the American Alliance of Museums and is a successful fundraiser with grants from the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Institute for Museum and Library Services, and Connecticut Humanities, among many others. Kathy has served on the National Council of the American Association for State and Local History, the National Advisory Council of the Rinalda House Museum in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, Connecticut Humanities, the Association for the Study of Connecticut History, and the Connecticut League of History Organizations. It's my pleasure to welcome Catherine Fields.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'm very excited to be here. I have to admit, this is the first time I've been on this side of the computer giving a lecture, so if I get a little fluey, just bear with me. The law school is one of my favorite things to talk about, so it's exciting for me to be able to, I hope, bring the story to a new audience. But first, I want to introduce you to some friends of mine. This is Ward Hunt. Ward Hunt was a United States Supreme Court Justice and presided over the 1873 case that denied Susan B. Anthony the vote. This is Eugenius Nisbet. He was from Georgia, and he was a delegate to the state's 1861 secession convention and proposed a resolution arguing for the right of Georgia to secede from the Union and form the Southern Confederacy. This is Roger Sherman Baldwin. He was from Connecticut. He defended the captured Africans at the Supreme Court in the Amistad case. He went on to serve as governor of Connecticut and a United States senator. This gentleman you probably all recognize, John C. Calhoun of South Carolina, served as vice president under John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson, was a U.S. senator, secretary of war, and secretary of state, but is best known for his pro-slavery, pro-states' rights, and pro-nullification views. Aaron Burr of New Jersey was Tapping Reeve's brother-in-law. He went on to become vice president and famously kill Alexander Hamilton in a duel in 1864, nightly on Broadway. Thomas Kimberly Brace was founder in 1819 and the first president of Aetna Insurance Company. Oliver Wilcox Jr. was from Litchfield and was a U.S. Secretary of the Treasury under George Washington. George Catlin of Pennsylvania became a renowned artist known for depicting images of Native American life. One of them is shown here. What do these guys with such disparate backgrounds and disparate beliefs have in common? They all attended Tapping Reeve's Litchfield Law School. They and over 1,000 other young men from all parts of the country, 24 states and territories, Canada and the West Indies, traveled to Litchfield to study the law with Tapping Reeve. The Litchfield Historical Society is responsible for telling the story of this remarkable man and his groundbreaking school. And we do that in a number of different ways. So today I want to share with you a brief history of the school and some of the students who attended, and then talk a little bit about what we do here at the Historical Society to bring this story to the public, both in person and virtually. Tapping Reeve, seen here on the left, in a print made from a painting by George Catlin. And if anybody ever sees the original painting, let me know. All we have is the print. This is obviously Tapping Reeve later in life. Was born in Brookhaven on Long Island. His mother's name was Deborah Tapping, hence his unusual first name. Reeve studied to become a teacher at the College of New Jersey, which is now known as Princeton. After college, Reeve was hired to teach in a grammar school in Elizabethtown, New Jersey, and also was hired as a tutor to Aaron and Sally Burr, who were the children of Aaron Burr Sr., seen here, and Esther Edwards Burr, his wife. Esther was the daughter of the noted theologian Jonathan Edwards. The Burr's parents died while the children were in their early teens, and recent college graduate Tapping Reeve was hired to tutor the two children. Sadly, we don't have images of Reeve as a young person or Burr and his sister Sally as young people, so I can't show those. But by 1769, Reeve, who was then 25 years old, had fallen deeply in love with 15-year-old Sally. They petitioned Sally's guardian, who was Timothy Burr, Uncle Timothy, to marry, but he didn't approve of the relationship, and they were separated. And Sally was sent to live with various Burr relatives in Connecticut and New Jersey. Reeve traveled to Hartford to study law with this guy whose name was Jesse Root. Root was a very prominent lawyer from Connecticut. During the Revolution, he served on the Connecticut Council of Safety and in the militia. He was a delegate to the Continental Congress. He sat as Chief Justice of the Connecticut Supreme Court, as well as state court judge. He served in the Connecticut House of Representatives and served on the Connecticut Constitutional Convention. So he's probably pretty well known around the old State House. So Reeve studied an apprenticeship with Root and was admitted to the bar in 1772. While he was in Hartford, he carried on a secret correspondence with Sally, so they maintained their relationship. And when Sally turned 18, they petitioned Uncle Timothy again to marry, and he gave them permission. And the letter says something like, "I think this is a really bad idea, but you're 18 years old and you're old enough to make up your own mind, so go ahead." Once they married, they moved to Litchfield, and Tapping Reeve and Sally built the house you see on the right here. The original house is the 4 bays on the right. The 2-bay addition on the left was added in 1784, about 10 years later. And in the map of Litchfield, which is going to show up a number of times in this presentation because I love it so much, the blue arrow points to Judge Reeve's office on South Street. So that shows the location of the house in the town. So they built in Litchfield and moved to Litchfield, and I don't have any proof of this, but I think that they moved to Litchfield because it was the only county town in Connecticut with a very active legal life that didn't have any of Sally's relatives in it, because there were Burrs and Edwardses everywhere. And we were sort of up in the hinterlands here. But Reeve made a success of his legal career, but almost immediately Aaron showed up to study law with Reeve. After graduating from Princeton, Burr had moved to Bethlehem, Connecticut to study for the ministry with Reverend Joseph Bellamy. And despite being the grandson of Jonathan Edwards, Burr was clearly not cut out to be a minister, and so law was his next try. He stayed for a year or so and then went off to fight the revolution, but we'll hear more about Burr later on. Burr was the first student, but the students kept coming. By 1784, there were so many students that Reeve built a little law school building next to the house. By that time, he had transitioned from the traditional apprenticeship method of teaching to a lecture method. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. I also need to, because I'm a proud graduate of the College of William and Mary, there's always a question about William and Mary being the first law school or Litchfield being the first law school. And there may be some room for debate, but there is no debate that this was the first building in America devoted entirely to the teaching of law. John Langbein, who is now the retired professor of legal history from Yale, used to bring his classes up, and he would take them into the law school building, and he would stand there and say, "This was the largest law school in the Anglo-American world," and you can see how big it is. In 1901, James Barr Ames of Harvard Law School referred to the Litchfield Law School building as the birthplace of the American law school. Law was considered a profession where one could make a good living and prepare for public office, and over the years, Reeve's reputation grew and the students kept coming. John Young Mason of Virginia wrote, "You are uncertain what will be the part you play in the theater of life. The law, in my estimation, is the noblest study to which you can possibly devote your time and attention. It is the high road to honor and preferment, the source of plentiful wealth, and the organ of people's rights. The young men journeying from around throughout the new republic to Litchfield to study law were well aware of what they saw as the advantages of the school. Samuel Miles Hopkins, a student in 1791, later wrote that Reeve School was already celebrated throughout the nation. In 1792, Roger Minot Sherman, shown on the right, wrote, "I am confident I would acquire more law knowledge in hearing Mr. Reeve's lectures in 3 months than I would by close application to study for 1 to 2 months in any other place or under any other instructor. Excuse me, that's 1 to 2 years in any other place or under any other instructor." Daniel Denison Rogers wrote to his business friend Julius Deming, "The law school of Litchfield has obtained so much reputation among us that I am desirous that a son of mine, if he may be admitted, pursue his studies there, instead of this place where there are so many temptations and interruptions to take off from study." So his son Henry was admitted to the law school, and he wrote home, "May I be thankful, I thank you, that you consented to let me come to this place. In no other could my advantages have been so great, in my opinion, advantages have been so great. In my opinion, a person can, at a moderate estimate, obtain more law here than he could in Boston in 3 years." Rogers continued, "The law was a perfect mystery to me without any object, beginning or end. Whereas after a few months of lectures, I begin to see its aim and design and to become more interested in its pursuit." The students often cited the presence of their fellow students as a major advantage to Litchfield as opposed to becoming an apprentice. And these are just a few images of some of the students at the law school. I think all of these are by Anson Dickinson, who was a painter of portrait miniatures, who was actually from Litchfield. I'd love to show these images because all of the images I've shown you previously of students at the law school showed them as sort of elder statesmen. Their portraits were painted after their careers were set and they were well established. These show that when these guys were here, they were kids. They were just out of college. They were young men, and they had their life in front of them. And I think these pictures show, just except for there's one older fellow in here, but show that they were an interesting group of young men who had a real interest in haircuts. I think some of these guys are really wonderful in their hair, but in any case. So in 1806, William Clay Cummings of Georgia wrote his father, "What I most prize in this place is my circle of associates." In 1821, William Ennis wrote to his Brown classmate, Horace Mann, who later became a student, "I came to Litchfield with a hatred to the study of the law. But since my residence here, it has opened a far different aspect. What was before a mass of perplexity and confusion has been rendered as plain and simple as nature will permit. You may be assured that there is no place on the continent more eligible for speedily acquiring a knowledge of the law." The Litchfield Law School enrolled more than 1,035 students between 1774 and 1833. We think the peak enrollment was in 1812 with 57 students, 1813 with 57 students enrolled. The students came from 24 states and territories, from as far away as Louisiana, Arkansas, and Missouri. And as one would guess, the largest number came from Connecticut, and then Massachusetts and New York. But it's really surprising always to me to see that Georgia and South Carolina sent a large number of students. This map was done by a young man for part of his PhD dissertation, Justin Simard, and Justin used the law school as the basis for his PhD work, and he's been a great help to us over the years. For most, a long, uncomfortable, and expensive journey, which they also ensued. Most by stagecoach. If they came from the south, they might come by water, by sailboat or boat up to New York City. From New York City, they'd go to New Haven by boat and then come by stage to Litchfield. Roger Sherman Baldwin, who was from Connecticut, wrote, "After a tedious day's journey, I have been safe landed in Litchfield Hill." And Cornelius Dubois, who is from New York State, wrote, "The road from Poughkeepsie here is, I think, the most tedious I have ever traveled. You see nothing but rocks and stones. Considering the roughness of the country and the scarcity of land, I am not at all surprised the Yankees depend on their livelihood for their livelihood on their wits. These guys, it's hard sometimes, they write very formally. What drew these students who were willing to travel great distances at great expense and not a little danger? As I mentioned, we count Burr as Reeve's first student, but Burr came to Tapping Reeve intending to train in the traditional way by clerking, transcribing contracts, copying documents, and filing court papers, literally doing all the basic menial daily drudgery associated with a legal practice. Through this work and by reading from the lawyer's law library, the clerk was expected to learn the law essentially by osmosis. Most prospective lawyers loathed clerking. If lawyers deserve the imputation of injustice and dishonesty, one former clerk noted, it is no instance more visible and notorious than in their conduct towards their apprentices. Thomas Jefferson confirmed this view, saying that the services expected from apprentices were worth more than the instructions they received. Even great lawyers such as James Wilson could be terrible teachers. According to one account, Wilson was almost useless as a teacher, never engaging his apprentices in professional discussion and constantly evading their questions. John Adams, who studied with some of Massachusetts bar's best lawyers, called his apprenticeship a dreary ramble. Clerks, it seemed, quote, mastered the law not because of their legal apprenticeship, but in spite of it. I have no proof, but I believe that Reeve was a born teacher, and so he devoted more time lecturing his clerks and eventually developing an 18-month course of lectures in an extensive law library. He trained as a teacher. I think, Burr came to clerk with him, but by 1784, when the law school was built, he had definitely transformed the clerking idea into a lecturing idea. Reeve's curriculum always began with a lecture on municipal law and proceeded through other principal titles of domestic law, pleadings, contracts, real property, evidence, mercantile law, and criminal law. Reeve initially taught on his own, but in 1798, when he accepted an appointment to the Connecticut Superior Court, he hired James Gould, who had graduated from the school in 1795, to become his assistant. The two taught together until 1820, when Reeve, who was then 76, retired. These are the frontispieces of two of the law school notebooks. So one is the one on the left, I think, is just Gould. It was from 1827. And the other is Reeve's and Gould's Lectures, Volume 6. We have a number of, and I'll talk more about the notebooks in terms of numbers later on, but we have a number of notebooks in our collection. And from the early years of the school, it's one slim volume of notes. And by later in the school, we have 6 volumes that are quite thick, because Reeve's lectures developed and changed as the laws of the nation developed and changed. So he kept up with what was happening, and the lectures became more and more complicated and more extensive as the legal system in the United States developed. Also, these are 2 more. This is the topic pages for slander and actions, debt, account, something. So in many cases, the students took opportunities to be creative and add a little bit of artwork to their notebooks. These are 2 really beautiful pages. We have one student whose name was George Younglove Cutler, who interspersed drawings of girls throughout his notebooks, probably girls from the Female Academy, which we'll talk about in a little while. And others did very ornate and elaborate title pages like these. Students had different views of Reeve and Gould, but liked and respected them both. Cyrus Alden, a student, wrote to his father, "Judge Reeve, who delivers the lectures, is a very pleasant, agreeable, communicative man. I have had the opportunity of hearing both Judge Reeve's lectures and those of Mr. Gould. For students who are just commencing the study of the law and who wish for the peculiarities of the science, the discussion of its principles by the judge would perhaps be most useful. But for him who requires a complete digest in a book of reference, I think those of Mr. Gould are preferable." In examining the law students' notes from Litchfield, we have to remember that education in this period was based on recitation, notation, and memorization. The recopying of notes from lectures, the commitment of the material to memory, and the recitation back verbatim at oral examinations was seen as an end in itself, exercising the muscle of the mind. And so these 2 notebook pages, you can see that on the left, he probably took those notes verbatim from the lecture, and then crossed out, copied, made notations, and then rewrote them in a cleaner hand to be the notes that he kept for his career. In 1823, James Gould published an article describing the course of law lectures, and Gould gave a lengthy account of what he saw as the purpose of the students' law notes. He wrote, "The future use for which the pupil designs his own notes is that of a manual or commonplace book, including a repository of references, to aid him in his professional practice, and I am persuaded that a given individual can, in no other way, acquire so ready and accurate a knowledge of the law as by digesting it in his own handwriting." Gould continued that the process of taking notes in class and then recopying them made the content their own, in a sense he believed no other method could. In addition, in a period of great expense and scarcity of books, the bound volumes of the student notes provided a basic law library for the attorneys. Many students noted that their notes were invaluable in helping them in their practice of law. This is one more sketch in one of the notebooks, and it's the legal tree, two versions of it, showing the development of the legal system and the way different branches of law are connected. And this was in, I believe, a Woodruff notebook in Litchfield. Tuition at the school was about $100 for the first year. It changed a little bit over time. And the same price charge, this was basically the same price charged most young men for clerking in a lawyer's office. The fee for the second year was generally a little bit less, about $60. Students roomed and boarded around house, and they might pay up to $32 a year for a room and $2 or $3 a week for board or meals. So it was not an inexpensive proposition to attend the law school. They also paid for necessities such as paper, ink, and pens, washing, wood, and candles. And students, as I said, boarded with families throughout the village. And in this, it's the Morse map again. You can see on the blue arrow, he indicates Mr. Bowles, where I board. So this map was drawn by Sidney Edward Morse, who was a student at the law school and also happened to be the son of Jedediah Morse, who was a very famous geographer and considered the father of American geography. So if you're Jedediah Morse's kid, what do you do when you write a letter home? You put a map in it. So this map is contained in a letter that Morse wrote to his father, but it tells us so much about town. It shows where people lived, where stores and offices were. Mr. Bowles, where I board, is a really nice confirmation that they lived and boarded around town. Mr. Beecher's meeting house, Lyman Beecher was the minister in the Congregational Meeting House in town during this period. It's an incredible map, and we use it all the time. Most students attended the school for between 12 and 18 months. The schedule followed that of colleges, running from the end of October to May, and then from mid-June to the end of September. What's really kind of odd, though, is that Reeve would allow you to come in at any time in the cycle. So you could come in with whatever lecture he was doing at that moment, and then you just stayed 18 months until you get back to the beginning. I think they preferred people to come in at the beginning for municipal law, but it didn't matter. You could just show up whenever and stay till you got through to the other end. Lectures generally were in the mornings, and then the students spent the afternoons either recopying notes or referring to books in Reeve's law library for citations. And Reeve was noted many times for having one of the best law libraries in the state. On Saturdays, they generally had moot court or oral examinations. When the Connecticut courts were in session at Litchfield twice a year, they suspended the lectures and students were required to attend the court sessions. And then at the end of their studies, when they completed the coursework, the students took their bar exams during the time that the court was in session, because all the members of the county bar were in town. The students found more than an education in Litchfield. They found Litchfield residents who would help them generate work and become more effective lawyers later in their careers. And again, all those people are shown on this map. Samuel Miles Hopkins wrote, "Litchfield is a town of hard, active, thinking, intelligent men who may probably be set forth as a pattern of the finest community on earth." And another student, William Cummings, wrote, "It is certainly a spot highly gifted in nature and chance seems to have concurred in adorning it by throwing together several considerable men in all the same village. During the school's heyday, Litchfield's population of about 4,600 made it Connecticut's fourth largest city, which is remarkable if you think about Litchfield today. Even though it was landlocked, roads and turnpikes enabled relatively easy access to Litchfield. New Haven was a day away and New York about 2. The town was also served by numerous Daily Mail stages headed to Albany, Poughkeepsie, Norwalk, and New Haven. Litchfield really was a vibrant town. It had its own weekly newspaper, and for a period it had 2 rival newspapers, and was home to some of Connecticut's most prominent citizens, including Oliver Wolcott, a signer of the Declaration of Independence, and future governor of Connecticut, Benjamin Talmadge, a colonel in the Revolutionary Army, known as Washington's spymaster, Jedediah Strong, a member of the Continental Congress and a delegate to the Connecticut Convention that ratified the U.S. Constitution. Throughout the community, it seemed that much of the focus of writing and conversation during the law school period was politics. So if you think about the folks that were in town, pretty ardent Federalists for the most part, and then those students coming from all over the country to Litchfield and bringing different points of view and different views. Political discussion in the town had to have been really kind of interesting. And fortunately for us, these guys wrote stuff down. And one of the joys of doing this work is getting to know the students through their letters. I've already read you a million quotes. I'm going to read you more. I think if I had to do the exhibit at the museum again, which you'll see at the end, I would do it entirely in their words because they really tell the story better than anyone else can. They took politics really, really seriously. I think of these guys as sort of the second generation. Their fathers and grandfathers fought in the Revolution and signed and wrote the Constitution. And these guys took it as their responsibility to make that document work. It was a new country. It was a new constitution. It was completely untried. And they had a sense of civic responsibility that it was their generation's duty to go into public office and make it work. Now, they had different opinions on how it should work, but they all had the same feeling that it was their responsibility. So in 1806, William Cummings wrote to his father, "At present, a very large portion of the people seem to be under the influence of a political mania." And in 1808, Cyrus Alden wrote to a friend, and this is one of my favorite quotes, "There is more virulence and party animosity here than you can imagine. The one party does not associate at all with the other. It is here, as everywhere, that the men of talent, information, and propriety, and of honesty and integrity are the Federalists. Yet notwithstanding this, the Democrats will not trust, trade, or traffic with them. They must have their democratic shoemakers and cobblers, democratic priests and physicians, democratic millers and bakers, and however sudden the emergency, they must have their democratic midwife." So the thing is that they took their politics very, very seriously, but somehow they also managed to remain friends. There's a letter between 2 brothers at Yale, Thomas and Jonathan Day, I think. And one writes to the other and says, "Are you going to the damn Democrat Bacon's wedding?" So they were on to different political sides, but they did manage to go to the wedding, and they did remain friends. But at the same time, politics and political debate weren't the only things they cared about. Litchfield was also home to the Litchfield Female Academy, run by Sarah Pierce from 1792 to 1833. We estimate that about 3,000 young women attended the academy in those years. We've identified about 1,500 of them. The presence of the Female Academy ensured there was an active social life in Litchfield, dances, parties, sleigh rides, lots of social activity. There were also joltings, misunderstandings, and broken engagements and between the students at the law school and the students at the Female Academy. And I like to think that living in Litchfield during this period was akin to being in a Jane Austen novel. All of the same things happened to these folks as happened to the characters in Jane Austen. And it's another way to try and remember that they really were kids when they were here. They were trying to find their way into their profession and into their future with future families. Walt Woodward, the Connecticut state historian, was here a couple years ago to give a lecture to a local group, and I hope Walt will forgive me, but he gave the best line ever about the law school and the female academy. Walt said, "The presence of both a male law school and a female academy in the same town also assured that Litchfield would be the nation's first college party town." And I think that's a pretty great description. I'll give you some of the students' own words. This is Stephen Mitchell to Frederick Wolcott. "I have sent my son to study with Mr. Reeve this winter, being much encouraged there by the hopes that he will live with you and be under your inspection. He is yet very young and probably will be fond of company, with a capital C, which I pray you to direct him in excusing. 'Tis my wish that he frequent no assemblies or dancing, but attend to your office to his studies." I think he must have had a hard time. Here's a few more. William Ennis to Horace Mann. "There are ladies in abundance who are monopolized by the law students." The two Day brothers, Jeremiah Day to Thomas Day. "Is it advisable for a young gentleman at the age of 21 or less who has just entered upon the study of the law to form a particular connection with a young lady with the intention of marrying her?" And then one of my favorites, Cornelius Dubois to Edward Van Winkle. This letter is one of the gems of the collection. There is nothing that Cornelius Dubois wrote that we haven't used multiple times in multiple places. It's a great letter. Here he says, "I attended an evening or two ago an exhibition of the young ladies' seminary of this place. There were several very handsome and interesting young women. I understand from Mrs. Reeve that all the marriageable young ladies have been married off, and that there is at present nothing but young fry in town. Consequently, that it will not be as gay as usual. The young ladies, she tells me, all marry law students. But it will take a year or two for the young crop to become fit for the harvest. You need apprehend no danger of my throwing up my bachelorhood." Robert Rankin, who was a law student who married Laura Wolcott, in later life wrote, "Here the course of true study did not run smooth. Rosy cheeks and the charms and virtues of the purest of New England's daughters mingled with and confused the law of the learned judge. Female rights and husband's liabilities, Cupid and law, female fascinations and intellectual beauties, all bewildered and befogged, both logic and law." So here are some of the young ladies. Again, portrait miniatures mostly by Anson Dickinson, although there are a few other artists in here. But you can see, again, they were young. In some cases, the girls at the school were as young as 12 or 13, although they did range up into the 20s. But there were, we've identified over 100 marriages between the students at the schools. This is our Oliver Stoughton Wolcott and Jane Conard Wolcott. He a law student, she a female academy student. And Elizabeth Canfield Talmadge. Elizabeth Canfield was from Sharon, Connecticut, and married Frederick Augustus Talmadge, who was one of Benjamin Talmadge's sons. If they survived the lectures and the parties, most of them moved on to establish their own careers. And this is a map of where the students went. And you can see the West is starting to open up, and there's a lot more movement than the students coming in. So they really went out to many, many more places than they came in from. Almost all of the students practiced law for some time, and as I mentioned, a huge percentage went into public office. The sort of summing is we had 2 vice presidents, 3 Supreme Court justices, 28 senators, 101 congressmen, 14 cabinet members, 14 governors, 16 chief justices of state Supreme Courts, and the list goes on and on. So how do we make sense of that jumble? It's a lot of information to organize and analyze, and how do we bring it to the public? Well, we started as a historical society trying to tell this story in the 1930s. In 1928, the Tapping Reeve house, which at that point was lived in by a descendant of the person who bought it from Reeve's descendant, so it went from Reeve to his niece to this family. The last member of that family passed away, and they left the house to Yale. Yale didn't want it, so they sold it to us for $20,000 2 months before the stock market crash. But the Historical Society really persevered during that period, and they put together a committee of a national committee to raise money to restore the law school. And you can see in this letter was written by William Howard Taft, who was then on the Supreme Court of the United States. supporting the law school. After the school closed, the school itself had moved all over town and was given back to the Historical Society in 1914, where it was placed next to our museum up the street from the law school. And then in 1930, it was moved back to the original spot by the Tapping Reeve house. And the bottom slide shows the laying of the cornerstone when the law school was rebuilt. So the Historical Society spent a few years in the early 1930s restoring the house and opened it as a historic house museum. And you can see some of the period rooms in the house here, and one of the early notices that the Reeve house was open. They did the best they could in the 1930s, but it's a really classic colonial revival interpretation of an 18th century house, and there were some problems with it. The picture of the wooden paneled room in the upper left when I got here was interpreted sort of as a kitchen, but it never really was a kitchen. And we found out later that the wood paneling in the room had been brought in from another house in Connecticut. The room on the right, upper right, was interpreted as a dining room, and that was a inner room in an addition to the house that was put on in 1890. So it was never a room that never existed during Reeve's time. But they did their best to really try and tell the story, but it wasn't the best way to approach this particular story. So in the mid 90s, actually, it's been a long time, after we renovated the museum, the history museum, we started to look at the Tapping Reeve house, and it became clear that as a historic house museum, that wasn't the best way to tell the story. That the story really was the school itself, the students, who they were, where they came from, and what they did after they left. So the first thing we did was a historic structures report on the house to find out really what had changed, and that's when we learned that paneling was not original to the house, that other paneling had been taken out and floors from other houses had been put in, that it was a real mishmash. But it was done as honestly as it could have been done in the 1930s. And so we did want to respect the 1930 restoration. So when we did the changes that I'm going to show you, we didn't architecturally change anything in the house. We painted some walls and did some changes to ceilings for lighting. But other than that, you could take the exhibit out and the house would be exactly the same as it was before we did the work that we did. So as I said, we decided that the story we wanted to tell was the story of the law school. And as we got started on that, it was like, how do we do this? We have notebooks, we have some quill pens. How do you tell the story of a school? And we found that by doing it through the students, it opened up all sorts of opportunities to go in many, many different directions. So we developed, on the right here, you can see they're called traveling papers. And I think we have papers for about 200 students, both from the law school and the female academy. And the papers do a couple of things. They guide you through the exhibit and take you from one area of the exhibit to the next. They introduce you to whatever interactives happen to be there and tell you what to do. But also if there's something about your student in the exhibit. So if there's a quote from Edward Deering Mansfield somewhere in the exhibit, your card will tell you to look for that. Or if there's a portrait of you or a reference to you or anything about you, the card makes it a lot more personal. So, and then on the left is the orientation gallery. And the way when we're open to the public, normally you get a pretty decent orientation to the school here, see a video, which is available on our YouTube channel now, and then go in and visit the law school, and you do the house, and you do that on your own. So the card is really critical to taking you through. And one of the first things you do is you learn where you're from, and you go to the trunk shown on the left, and you take what is called a travel ticket. And the travel ticket is based on a turnpike ticket that we have in our collection, but on the back, depending on where you're from, it tells you what your travel was like. So you immediately learn that if you're from far away, it was a long and expensive and arduous journey. So just ways to personalize the tour. And then you move into an area called Getting Settled, which is on the upper left. And in this, you can't see the behind the scrims very clearly, but on the left, you're introduced to the female academy, and on the right to the gentlemen of town and the political structure of town. And then the floor cloth, the round floor cloth you can see is a reproduction of the Morse Map, which, as I mentioned, is one of my favorite things ever. And then you go through Tapping Reeve's office, or where Tapping Reeve's office would have been in the original house. And I don't have all the sections here. This is just a few. One of the sections is called Becoming Informed. And in that section, we've made newspapers with different stories. And we have a polling booth where you can vote on a different question. So the question we have up most often is, was Aaron Burr guilty of treason? So the polling stand will then send you to one of the newspapers to read a couple of different stories in the paper, and then you can go back and vote whether Aaron Burr was guilty of treason. As we were doing this all and politics became so important, we got confused about the political system and political parties. So we took the legal tree that you saw from the notebook earlier and developed what we called how to grow a party system. So the tree in this room talks about the different parties and how the Democratic and Republican parties developed and sort of merged different parties and ended up about the time of the Civil War as Democrats and Republicans. Your traveling card will also tell you at that point what your politics are, if you're a man. So for almost all of the law students, we know what political party they belong to. We know very little about politics for the female academy students. So if we could find out their father's politics, we tell them what political party their fathers belong to. And then you're invited to take a party ticket. So you can, if you're a Federalist or an Anti-Federalist, you can take either the Anti-Federalist ticket or the Federalist ticket, which then again introduces you very briefly to what the different parties believed in. Couple more rooms, and the last gallery is called Balancing Your Life, where we talk about what the students did when they left. Most of them became lawyers. Many of them entered politics, and a huge number of them also entered business, became businessmen. So this is the sort of the wrap up of what your life was like after you left the law school. The exhibit continues in the law school building itself, where we have reproductions of original desks and reproductions of notebooks on the desk, so you can see sort of what their school life was like. So the museum is open to the public, and we give tours to the public, and we give or self-guided tours for people who come as individual groups. We have a really robust school program, and this is just one example of that. Looking at this today and thinking those children are too close together. So this is clearly a pre-COVID picture, but this is a Federalist, Anti-Federalist debate using students and the different students and their different beliefs to take the two sides of the debate. A really, really popular and great program. The building gets used for all sorts of interesting things. These are photographs of the Connecticut Appellate Court, who met a couple years ago and had 2 different hearings in the law school, which was a fabulous use of the building and a great way to bring new audiences in. We also had a couple of private schools who had their final debate competitions here. We had a wonderful and exciting visit a few years ago from Justice Kennedy of the Supreme Court when he was still on the court, where he spent a lot of time talking about legal education, and it was just a fascinating visit. But then we're here in Litchfield, really up in the hills, and it's not necessarily easy to get to us, and we have what we think is a really national story to tell. So a few years ago, we developed the Litchfield Ledger, which is a database of all of the students at the law school and the female academy. So we have for each student, we have as much of a biography as we can of the student. Some are more extensive than others. We also have links to any family members of the students who may or may not have attended the academy or the law school, and then links for the law students to any writings that we may know about that are in public repositories, or images like the paintings. For the female academy students, we have links to the artwork that they did in the school or other areas that in which they connect. And it's been up for a few years now, and it's been a great resource. And then I talked about the notebooks. We have in our collection 60 some notebooks. Yale has more than we do. And we have a great relationship with the Yale Law School. They've been incredibly helpful to us. And this is one of those cases. A few years ago, we got one of those phone calls. It was just a great phone call. And Mike Widener, who is the special collections librarian at the law school, said, "We have a grant to digitize all of the law school notebooks in our collection. Can we do yours too?" It's like, yes, you can. So they did. And they developed this website, which is about the notebooks. And if you look at a student notebook on this site, it links to the ledger, so you can look at the notebook and also then learn about the student. Whitney Bagnall, who is a retired law librarian, has spent an enormous amount of time with the notebooks, and she's done all sorts of work. So you can see composite curriculums and coincidence with lectures and a really great analysis of the notebooks. And this has become very useful for people doing research. We also do the traditional publications. The book on the left, with the brown cover, is something we did last year. And it's really kind of a guidebook to the law school. It has a history of the law school and a history of the female academy, biographies of some of the students, and some short essays by scholars who are working in different fields attached to the law school. A couple of them are young men who are recent PhDs who did their research using the ledger and used the law school as a significant part of their research. Another essay in our book is by Ron Chester, and Ron is a retired law professor from Boston who started learning about Tapping Reeve and became completely entranced with him, and so wrote an essay for the book, wrote this book, the little biography, for us, and has done a number of lectures for us. And the red book in back is by Paul Hicks, and Paul is a lawyer who actually is a descendant of one of the law students. And in researching his ancestor, he became really interested in the law school and put together this book for us. So we work that way as well. And then our latest, which we'd hoped to show you today, but the technology didn't work, is a 3D model walkthrough of the exhibit. Because of COVID, the museums are closed, and I don't anticipate opening until sometime next year in the best of all possible worlds. But we wanted to be able to continue to give people the story. So this is a 3D model similar to the kinds of models that you see on real estate sites that walks you through the house, but it's tagged so that you can see text labels or links to the ledger if it's a student that's been tagged, links to the video that we show in the law school. It's a work in progress. We're revising and adding to it as we go, but it's a really neat way to be able to walk through the exhibit and see what we have. So we are continuing to try and tell the story. We think it's a national story that deserves attention. There's nothing that happened in this country, I think, between 1800 and 1850 that one of these guys didn't have their hands in. So there's lots of different ways into the story. We can work with law students and we can work with third graders. There's just lots of different ways to approach this, I think, really critical and important story. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Kathy, for sharing this information with us. As you were speaking, I was really reflecting on the fact that here at Connecticut's Old State House, being one of the seats of state government in Connecticut, so many of the students impacted our state and came to this building. So it's almost like the natural progression to learn about the law school. And I just wanted to mention that we're going to put the link to the 3D tour in the comments for folks.
Oh, great. Thank you.
But thank you so much for being with us. We do have a few audience questions that have come out that I wanted to just share with you. I think one of the big questions that we had was by one of our audience members who asked, why did the law school close its door? And you talked a little bit about the building's preservation, but with so many buildings being torn down, it really is fortunate that the law school actually survived, but people were curious about why the school came to an end.
Sure. It's incredible that the law school building actually survived. But so the law school came to an end. Tapping Reeve passed away. James Gould continued the school for a number of years. But when it became time for Gould to retire, a couple of students tried to keep it going. But by that time, the universities had established law schools. And so Yale had a law school, Harvard had a law school, and a lot of other universities did as well. And it just made a lot more sense to have a school that was attached to a university than a private proprietary school like this one. So it just sort of died a natural death. John Langbein, in a conversation, the legal historian at Yale, once said that the school was the membrane between the proprietary law schools and the apprenticeship system to law schools as we know them today. So I think we played a role in the university law schools, but they took over pretty quickly as soon as the school was operating and as it ended.
With the law school producing so many lawyers who went on to hold important elected and appointed official roles in the government, what do you attribute that to? Was it the quality of their education, the connections of Reeves and Gould, or do you think that the students themselves created kind of a network by their association?
And that's a really interesting question and a really good one. The world seems much smaller in those days. The family connections, the personal connections, and then the connections with classmates just seem to have been really, really important to them. As I said, I think they had a sense of responsibility for public office, and so they didn't always end up on the national stage, but most of them held public office at least locally or statewide at some point. So I think they knew each other, they encouraged each other, they had a good education, they were good lawyers, but I think the connections really helped make that happen. Does that make sense?
It does, yes. Yes, and it's just as you were talking, you would mention a name and it would trigger kind of that one step remove to someone that I knew of in my work. So it was a small
Yeah.
world. And I just want to remind our visitors who are joining us, please put any questions you have in comments. We're happy to ask them of our speaker here. I did have a couple other questions to ask of you, which is, since the law school was so kind of seminal in the development of our country, are there any special traditions that law students today practice because of the Litchfield Law School?
That's a good question. It's possible that Reeve was one of the earliest people to use a moot court method of teaching. I don't know that he was actually the first, but I think you can trace a pretty strong moot court tradition back to the school. But that's, in terms of other sort of law school traditions, I'm not sure.
And something that's of interest to us here at the Old State House, which is, did the law school require a charter to operate from the state of Connecticut?
I don't believe so. I've never seen one mentioned or referred to. He also didn't give diplomas. He just wrote letters of recommendation.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of the students came through other letters of recommendation. So it really was a network.
Yeah. I was wondering how they advertise. So that's really interesting. Because the school started right before the Revolutionary War, what was the impact of the war on the school?
I don't know. So we know that, and I think some of my staff are watching this. If any of them has the answer, just type it in. We know that Burr only stayed for a short time because of the revolution and then left. Reeve did play some committee roles during the revolution, but it was really during those years that he started to attract more and more students who were starting as apprentices, but then becoming he evolved into the lecture system. So those were really, really important years for the school, because between the 1774 Burr year and 1784, when he built the law school, in those years, it evolved fully into the lectureship system that we know. So he was going great guns during the Revolution. He didn't slow down. Those were important years.
Really neat. Well, I think I don't see any other audience questions. So again, our heartfelt thanks to you for this really interesting presentation today. We really appreciate you joining us from Litchfield and learning more about so many interesting people. Oh, and I did have one final question that I kind of wrote a note to myself about. It's been a few years now since you've worked on the restoration of the law school. Do you have any plans for further changes or things to enhance the experience?
So yes, that's a very good question. So we have talked about that quite a lot. It doesn't have any electronic bits to it other than the video that we show. So we have come up with ideas for some interesting ways we can add some technology to the exhibit, which would require some significant grant funding, and we haven't yet gotten to that point, but we probably will enhance it in some way in the next few years. And then, it seems to still work and people still enjoy it, but eventually there'll come a time when we want to, and it won't be me, it'll be the next person, when the organization wants to change it into something else. And that's terrific, because there's lots of new research, lots of new information, and lots of new ways of doing things. And as I said somewhere in there, that the students' words are so amazing that you could tell the story just using their words. And when we did this, we didn't have the possibility of internet research. We had to physically go and visit archives and read letters. And it's so much easier now to get that kind of information. So I think there's lots of interesting things that could be done when the time is right.
Great. Well, thank you for that. It's something to look forward to. I know I want to go online and look at the Litchfield Ledger, learn a little bit more. So
great.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Good to have you.
Yeah, it was fun. Thanks.
And for those of you who are with us in the audience, we will be broadcasting this program again. It's been recorded, so we will share it. And I would just invite you to please fill out the survey that is in the comments section. We really do appreciate it, and we look to those comments for some additional ideas for programs. And I'd like to invite you to join us for our next upcoming programs. We have a very busy November. This Thursday at 7 o'clock is an evening conversation about the Prudence Crandall House called A Clean Slate, Clearing Room for the Complete Story of Crandall's Canterbury School. You can see our theme for November is education. And then on Monday, November the 30th at 3 o'clock is a program entitled Legislative Landmarks, the American School for the Deaf. So we invite you to join us for those programs, and we'll see you back here at Connecticut's Old State House very soon. Thanks for joining us.